Think Belle Starr rode through the Old West with twin Colt 45s blazing, terrorizing frontier towns like some kind of female Jesse James. Think again. The woman Hollywood turned into the bandit queen was convicted of exactly one crime in her entire life: horse theft. Contemporary witnesses who actually knew her said she was not a good shot, and there is no evidence she ever fired a shot in a personal encounter. Here is what really matters. We have one authenticated photograph from 1886 that shows Belle Starr armed. And in that photograph, she is not carrying the Colt revolvers that every single movie has put in her hands for the past 85 years. She is carrying a Smith & Wesson Model 3. Today, we are looking at the 5 firearms actually connected to Belle Starr through documented evidence, authenticated artifacts, and that one crucial photograph. We are going to examine why Hollywood got every single one wrong and how a dime novelist created a legend that fooled generations. The real story is better than the fiction. Let's get into it. Only 3 to 5 authenticated photographs of Belle Starr exist. The most important one for firearms research was taken by Roeder Brothers Studio in Fort Smith, Arkansas, on May 23, 1886. This is a cabinet card image, the kind you would get at a professional photography studio. In this photograph, Belle sits side saddle on her horse. She is staring intensely at the camera. She is wearing her signature black velvet riding habit, and clearly visible on her hip is a single loop holster containing a pearl-handled revolver. Let me repeat that. A single holster, not the twin rig that movies always show. Not a battery of revolvers strapped across her hips like some kind of walking arsenal. One gun. Firearms experts on the Smith & Wesson forum have analyzed this photograph in detail. They have identified the revolver as a Smith & Wesson Model 3, most likely the Russian variant. How can they tell? The distinctive round butt grip profile, the frame shape. These details are inconsistent with the Colt single-action army that Hollywood invariably depicts. One expert wrote, quote, "Mr. Younger might have rewarded Belle with a Smith & Wesson No. 3 American, but the pistol butt in the photo is a Russian," end quote. Legend claims Cole Younger gave her this weapon as a gift. Whether that is true or not, the photograph does not lie. Belle Starr carried a Smith & Wesson, not a Colt. A second authenticated photograph from the Dickinson Research Center shows Belle standing with pistols around 1886, floor-length dress, gun in hand, the other hand resting on the back of a chair. The Blue Duck photograph from May 24, 1886 shows no visible firearm. Here is what is crucial. None of the authenticated photographs show the twin-holstered gunfighter image that dime novels and Hollywood created. None of them. The single holster makes perfect sense when you understand how Belle actually traveled. She rode side saddle, wearing voluminous skirts. A standard gunfighter drop loop holster would have hung too low, tangling with the fabric. The single loop design she used was worn high on the waist. It relied on friction from the belt through a single cut in the leather to hold the holster in place. This was a practical adaptation for a woman who spent hours on horseback. The pearl grips visible in the photograph are also significant. In the 1880s, this material was likely mother of pearl. Ivory was also used, but pearl was considered more flashy, more feminine. Gun collectors called these barbecue guns, weapons worn to be seen. The choice of pearl grip signals that this revolver was a status symbol. This was jewelry as much as weaponry. In the violent hierarchy of Indian Territory, the visible presence of high-quality firearms served as a signal. Belle Starr was demanding to be met with. The same caution and respect accorded to the male outlaws who rode alongside her. That single photograph, taken in a Fort Smith studio in 1886, proves that Hollywood has been giving her the wrong gun for 8.5 decades. To understand why Hollywood got it so wrong, we need to talk about Richard K. Fox. Fox was the publisher of the National Police Gazette. When Belle Starr was murdered in February of 1889, Fox saw an opportunity. He commissioned a novel, Belle Starr, the Bandit Queen, or the female Jesse James. It was published within months of her death. It sold for 25 cents. And it invented almost everything we think we know about Belle Starr. Fox's writers equipped their fictional Belle with a veritable armory. The novel described her wearing a battery of revolvers across her hips, galloping through towns like Dallas and Fort Smith with pistols blazing, terrorizing saloons and cleaning out crooked poker games. None of this happened. The battery description implies multiple heavy frame revolvers. For a woman often described by contemporaries as having a slender or bony frame, this would have been physically debilitating. Try this yourself. A loaded Colt single-action army weighs approximately 2.3 pounds. Strap 2 of them to a belt over a velvet skirt. See how long before the fabric sags and the belt chafes. The reality documented in court records tells a different story. Belle Starr was indeed an associate of the James Younger gang. She was a facilitator for fencing stolen horses. But there is no judicial record of her participating in bank or train robberies, no record of stand-up gunfights with lawmen. Her known arrests paint a picture of larceny and strategy, not ballistic confrontation. 1882, indicted for horse theft. 1886, charged with robbery while disguised as a man. She was acquitted due to lack of evidence. That is it. The New York Times obituary published February 6, 1889, added fuel to the fire. It called her the most desperate woman that ever figured on the borders. It falsely claimed she had been arrested for murder and robbery a score of times. Court records show exactly one conviction, horse theft in 1883. She was sentenced by Judge Isaac Parker to 1 year. She served 9 months as, quote, a model prisoner, end quote. Glenn Shirley, the foremost Belle Starr scholar, notes that Fox's novel still is cited as a historical reference despite its artistic license and lack of historical accuracy. That 25-cent piece of pulp fiction created the template. Every movie, every TV show, every video game that depicts Belle Starr as a gun-blazing desperado traces back to Richard K. Fox's profitable fabrication. The Police Gazette distorted the nature of her armament, not the fact of it. Belle Starr was heavily armed, but her weapons were tools of deterrence and authority, not offense. In carrying high-quality firearms visibly, she rejected the passive role assigned to Victorian women. She demanded instead to be treated as an independent operator, a queen who could enforce her own boundaries without reliance on male protection. Now we get to the most significant firearm associated with Belle Starr, not the pistol of legend, a lever-action rifle. A Winchester Model 1873 has been linked to Belle Starr with a degree of certainty that is rare in the field of Western Americana. This artifact provides deep insight into her practical approach to self-defense and frontier survival. The rifle is currently in the possession of Dr. Ron Hood, a Tulsa orthopedic surgeon. Dr. Hood acquired this Winchester as part of a real estate transaction that included the purchase of the 55-acre tract of land at Younger's Bend. That is the site of Belle Starr's original cabin and grave. The provenance of this rifle is robust. It was originally collected by Claude Hamilton, a local barber and amateur historian in the Porham-Eufaula area. Hamilton dedicated his life to excavating and preserving the history of Belle Starr. He recognized that oral history in Belle Starr country was fading. He aggressively sought to authenticate artifacts through the Starr family descendants. He succeeded in obtaining signed affidavits from Belle's direct lineage. These affidavits attest that the Winchester 1873 in his collection was indeed the property of Belle Starr. When Dr. Hood purchased the land in the collection from Hamilton's estate, this rifle, along with Belle's side saddle, returned to the site of its historical usage. The authenticated Winchester is chambered in .38-40 Winchester center fire. This caliber choice is forensically significant. It contradicts the heavily armed desperado trope that might suggest a .44-40 or a .45-70 Buffalo gun. The .38-40 was introduced in 1874. It is essentially a necked-down .44-40. It fires approximately a 180-grain bullet at around 1,160 feet per second. This offered adequate stopping power for deer and human defense, but it generated less recoil than the .44-40. For a woman of slight build, the recoil of full-power military loads could be fatiguing. The .38-40 offered a sweet spot of ballistic performance. It possessed sufficient energy to dispatch predators, both animal and human, within the 100-yard combat distances typical of the brushy Indian Territory. Yet, it was mild enough to allow for rapid, accurate follow-up shots. The standard Winchester 1873 rifle held 15+1 rounds. That is overwhelming firepower compared to single-shot rifles or shotguns of the era. But here's where Belle Starr demonstrated real logistical thinking. By the 1880s, Colt was chambering their single-action Army revolvers in .38-40. They marked it as 38 WCF on the barrel. This allowed a rider to carry a single type of ammunition for both rifle and pistol. Think about what this means. Belle lived at Younger's Bend, miles from the nearest mercantile. Ammunition had to be purchased in bulk or ordered from distant suppliers. Carrying two different calibers meant maintaining two separate supply chains. By choosing a .38-40 rifle and very likely pairing it with a .38-40 revolver, she could simplify her logistics dramatically. This is not the decision of a theatrical desperado. This is the decision of a pragmatic survivor who understood the harsh realities of frontier life. One more detail about this rifle deserves attention. The Winchester in the Hood-Hamilton collection has 3 distinct notches filed into the comb of the buttstock. In Western folklore, notches are universally interpreted as a tally of kills. However, the historical record does not support the claim that Belle Starr killed 3 people. So what do the notches mean? One hypothesis suggests theatricality. Belle was known for her strong sense of style and cultivation of her own legend. She may have added the notches herself to intimidate rivals. In the outlaw economy, reputation was currency. Appearing to be a killer was often as effective as being one. Another hypothesis suggests the notches represent her 3 husbands and partners: Jim Reed, killed in 1874, Sam Starr, killed in 1886, Jim July, her partner at the time of her death. This macabre keeping of score would fit the Black Widow aspect of her legend, though it remains speculative. A third possibility is simpler. The notches could record significant game kills, bear or trophy deer. These were vital food sources for a remote homestead. Regardless of their meaning, the notches serve as a tangible link to the personality of the owner. A woman who viewed her weapon not just as a tool, but as a diary of her experiences. Let's return to that 1886 photograph. The revolver visible in Belle's holster features a grip that is starkly white against the dark velvet of her riding habit. This confirms the pearl-handled description found in oral histories and dime novels. While the barrel and cylinder are obscured by the holster, the grip geometry and frame size are consistent with either a Colt single-action Army or potentially a Smith & Wesson Schofield. The Colt single-action Army was the ubiquitous peacemaker of the era. You could not throw a rock in Indian Territory without hitting someone carrying one. But the Smith & Wesson Schofield had advantages for horseback riders. Its top brake mechanism allowed for faster reloading while mounted. This was a relevant consideration for a solo rider like Belle, who often traveled alone. The Colt 45 is the weapon most cited in legend and contemporary accounts. If Belle did pair her Winchester with a revolver in the same caliber, a Colt chambered in .38-40 would make the most sense. But that Smith & Wesson Model 3 in the photograph suggests she may have owned multiple handguns for different purposes. Now we need to address one of the most persistent myths, the claim that Belle called her pistol "my baby." This quote appears in numerous dime novels and popularized biographies. It serves to dehumanize her by suggesting she offered maternal affection to a killing instrument. But a deep reading of her letters and journals suggests a conflation of terms. Belle had a daughter, Pearl, born of her marriage to Jim Reed. Belle frequently referred to Pearl as "my baby" in her correspondence. She expressed a desire to settle down and provide a quiet life for her daughter. It is highly probable that dime novelists, in their effort to paint Belle as a desperate woman, recontextualized genuine maternal quotes about her daughter to refer to her firearm. This linguistic sleight of hand transformed a devoted mother into a gun-fetishizing sociopath. It fed the public's appetite for a wild Western Amazon. Following Belle's murder in 1889, she was buried near her cabin at Younger's Bend. In a final act of devotion to her outlaw queen persona, She was interred with her jewelry and, reportedly, her favorite pistol. Likely the pearl-handled revolver seen in the 1886 photograph. Less than a month after the funeral, the grave was robbed. Thieves desecrated the site. They stole the jewelry and the firearm. This theft effectively severed the chain of custody for her primary sidearm. Unlike the Winchester, which remained in the house and passed to the Hamilton collection, the pistol entered the black market of 1889. Consequently, any Belle Starr pistol appearing on the modern market without a direct lineage to this theft must be viewed as spurious. The real pearl-handled gun is likely long lost, perhaps rusting in a private collection somewhere. Perhaps destroyed, its provenance erased by the crime of its acquisition. No museum has verified Belle Starr firearms with documented provenance beyond the Winchester. The court records contain no weapons inventories. The legend of the twin pistols is built almost entirely on dime novel fabrication. While the Winchester and the revolver represent the weapons Belle lived by, the shotgun represents the weapon she died by. On February 3, 1889, 2 days before her 41st birthday, Belle Starr was riding home from a neighbor's house near Younger's Bend in Indian Territory. She was ambushed. She took 2 shotgun blasts, one to the back, one to the neck, shoulder, and face. The second shot was the kill shot, fired at close range after she had been unhorsed by the first blast. The murder remains officially unsolved. Forensic details from the scene suggest the weapon used was a double-barrel shotgun, likely 10 or 12 gauge, standard for the era, loaded with buckshot, probably double-aught or number 1 buck. At the ambush range, this load would have inflicted massive trauma. A persistent local legend asserts that Belle was killed with her own shotgun, that the killer accessed it from her home. If this detail is true, it highlights the ubiquity of the shotgun in the frontier homestead. While rifles and pistols were the tools of the outlaw trade, the shotgun was the tool of the farmer and the homeowner. The ultimate defensive weapon. Simple, reliable, devastating at close range. The primary suspect was Edgar Watson, a neighbor who feared Belle would turn him in for a Florida murder warrant. Watson was tried and acquitted due to lack of eyewitness evidence. Other suspects included Belle's husband, Jim July Starr, who reportedly offered $200 to have her killed. Even her son, Eddie Reed, was suspected. Belle had recently beaten him for mistreating her horse. The irony of Belle's death is palpable. The woman famous for her battery of revolvers and her pearl-handled pistols. The woman dime novelists depicted as the female Jessie James. The woman who supposedly rode through frontier towns with guns blazing. She was cut down by the most common, unglamorous weapon of the era, wielded by a hidden assassin, not in the open combat she was rumored to seek. Not in a climactic gunfight that would have made good copy for the Police Gazette, shotgunned from ambush on a dirt road in Indian Territory. At her burial, following Cherokee tradition, a revolver was placed in her hand. This firearm was later stolen when the grave was vandalized. Now let's talk about how the movies perpetuated these myths. Belle Starr, released in 1941, starred Gene Tierney. The film depicts Belle during the Civil War in the 1860s. The firearms shown include Remington 1858 New Army revolvers and Springfield Model 1873 trapdoor cavalry carbines. Here is the problem. The Springfield Model 1873 was not manufactured until 1873. The film shows these rifles being used in the 1860s. That is a 7 to 10 year anachronism. More importantly, the Remington 1858 is completely different from the Smith & Wesson Model 3 visible in Belle's actual photograph. Multiple reviewers noted, quote, "This is a highly romanticized retelling with little connection with history," end quote, and, quote, "They messed it up pretty badly," end quote. Montana Belle, released in 1952, starred Jane Russell. The fundamental problem with this film is that it pairs Belle Starr with the Dalton Gang. This is historically impossible. Belle was murdered in February of 1889. The Dalton Gang did not become active until 1890. Jane Russell is portrayed as a sharpshooter with pistols. Another fiction. Frederick S. Bard's investigation, conducted in 1910 with people who actually knew Belle, concluded she was not a good shot. The Long Riders, released in 1980 and starring Pamela Reed, actually got closer to historical accuracy in one respect. The film depicts Belle carrying a Sharps Model 1 C4-barreled pepperbox pistol. The Sharps pepperbox was manufactured from 1859 to 1874. This makes it period appropriate. It is one of the more historically plausible choices, though there is no evidence Belle specifically owned this model. The 1980 TV movie Belle, Starr starred Elizabeth Montgomery. Standard TV Western props were used. Belle is described as aiming her rifle meaningfully, but no specific firearms are documented in this production. Why do all these movies get it wrong? Because the truth is not as visually exciting as the fiction. A woman carrying a single pearl-handled revolver in a high-waisted holster over a velvet skirt is authentic, but it does not create the iconic silhouette of a gunfighter. Twin holsters, slung low, leather creaking, hands hovering over matched Colt 45s. That is the image dime novels sold. That is the image Hollywood needed. The real Belle Starr does not fit the mold. She was a horse thief and a fence, a woman who harbored fugitives and bribed officials to free captured gang members. She carried weapons for deterrence and status, not for blazing gunfights in the streets of Fort Smith. Her choice of a .38-40 Winchester shows logistical thinking. Her choice of pearl grips shows an understanding of image and power. But none of that makes for good cinema. Not in 1941, not even today. So Hollywood gave her twin Colts. They gave her bank robberies and train heists. They gave her the guns she never carried and the crimes she never committed. They gave audiences what Richard K. Fox promised in his 25-cent dime novel: the Bandit Queen, the female Jesse James, a woman who never existed. Let's close by talking about who Belle Starr actually was. Frederick S. Barday was an Oklahoma newspaperman. In 1910, he conducted on-the-scene interviews with people who had actually known Belle Starr. His conclusion should settle this debate once and for all. Quote, "Time has thrown about her life a tinge of romance, yet those who knew her well see no glamour in what she did. She was merely a dissolute woman, unfortunate in her early life, and in her later years, merely a companion of thieves and outlaws. It is doubtful if she ever did more than steal horses. There is no proof that she ever helped rob a train or a traveler, ever fired a shot in a personal encounter, nor was she a good shot, or even stained her hands with blood." End quote. This investigation was conducted when witnesses were still alive. Published in the St. Louis Republic on August 29, 1910. It directly contradicts every Hollywood gunfight sequence. Encyclopedia.com confirms, quote, "She has been credited with a long list of spectacular crimes, but it appears she did little more than steal some horses and harbor some fugitive friends." End quote. So what did Belle Starr actually do? She operated a haven for outlaws at Younger's Bend. She organized and fenced for rustlers and horse thieves. She reportedly bribed officials to free captured gang members. Her actual criminal record is remarkably thin. Convicted once, arrested a handful of times, acquitted when evidence was lacking. Biography.com summarizes it perfectly. Quote, "Historians suggest her renegade reputation surpasses her actual criminal activity." End quote. But here is what makes the real Belle Starr more interesting than the fiction. She carved out a space for herself in one of the most violent male-dominated environments in American history. Indian Territory in the 1880s was a jurisdictional nightmare. Federal marshals, tribal courts, vigilante justice. As a woman operating independently in this chaos, Belle needed to project authority. She needed to signal that she was not to be trifled with. Her weapons were part of that signal. The Winchester Model 1873 was called the gun that won the West for a reason. It was reliable, powerful, and instantly recognizable. Carrying one said, "I am armed and I know how to use this." The pearl-handled revolver in a single holster worn high on the waist said, "I am not like the other women you know." The choice of .38-40 caliber said, "I think strategically about logistics and sustainability." These were not the weapons of a desperado looking for gunfights. These were the weapons of a pragmatic survivor who understood that in the outlaw economy, image was as important as ability. The three notches on her rifle stock, whether they represented husbands or game or pure theater, said, "I have a story to tell, and I will control how it is told." Belle Starr rejected the passive role assigned to Victorian women. She demanded to be met with the caution and respect accorded to male outlaws. And when you understand her weapons in that context, they make perfect sense. The real guns Belle Starr actually carried tell a story very different from the Hollywood legend. One authenticated Winchester Model 1873 in 3840, WCF, currently preserved in the Dr. Ron Hood collection with family affidavits confirming provenance. One pearl-handled revolver visible in an 1886 photograph, most likely a Smith & Wesson Model 3, possibly a Colt in 3840 caliber, lost to a grave robbery less than a month after her burial. One double-barrel shotgun, the weapon that killed her, possibly her own. No twin Colts slung low on her hips, no battery of revolvers, no blazing guns terrorizing frontier towns, no evidence she ever fired a shot in anger. One conviction: horse theft. The Bandit Queen was a creation of Richard K. Fox's dime novel, published for 25 cents in 1889 and cited as historical fact ever since. Hollywood has been giving her the wrong guns for 85 years because the truth does not fit the archetype. But the truth is more interesting. A woman who understood that on the frontier, power came from deterrence and image as much as from ability. Who chose her weapons strategically for logistics and survival. Who carried a Winchester and a pearl-handled revolver not to rob trains, but to enforce her boundaries and project authority in a male-dominated world. That is the Belle Starr worth remembering. The one photograph from 1886 proves it. The authenticated Winchester in the Hood collection confirms it. The historical record, when you actually read it, supports it. The movies will keep giving her twin Colts. The video games will keep making her a sharpshooter. The legend will persist. But now you know better. You know the real guns Belle Starr actually carried, and you know why that matters. If you want to dig deeper into this story, the National Archives at Kansas City houses the Fort Smith criminal case files. The Fort Smith National Historic Site preserves Judge Parker's courtroom. The Dickinson Research Center at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City holds the Glenn D. Shirley collection. The evidence is there if you want to find it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.